Okay, hello everyone. So just for potential audiences, if people are watching this in the future, my name is Milja Gluchovic and I'm in Theatre and Performance Studies at University of Warwick. And with us today, in the order on the Zoom screen, Mark Fleischmann from Cape Town University, and Mina Fischek from Bogazici University. Mina, please correct me.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, Maria Estrada Fuentes, Royal Holloway, London, and Olivera Jokic, CUNY, New York. And Sylvia, of course, Yesrich at Warwick University. Sorry, Sylvia.
So, and me, you forgot me.
Oh, and Milena. Sorry, Milena, you're not in the screen and I'm not being thoughtful here. Milena Dragicevic-Šešić from University of Arts in Belgrade.
Hi.
Hi. So I think, yeah, not all of you know each other, but this is a great opportunity to meet. So the title of our second session is provisionally Slow University, Higher Education in the Time of Pandemics, following up on Cultures of the Left in the Time of Pandemics that we had a couple of weeks ago. And we distributed some readings in advance as the first time. I'm just wondering whether perhaps we could start with some reports from the ground, so to speak, from our colleagues that are joining us for the first time, Mark and Milena and Maria Estrada from London, just with perhaps some comments on the situation in your home universities in relation to the pandemics. Just whatever you're happy to share, or any concerns or news.
So, Milena.
Okay, go.
Cape Town is like everywhere else in a lockdown situation, or perhaps in some respects even more extreme. The response from government has been very intense, and we've been in quite a strong lockdown since for now nearly 50 days. So the university is obviously closed. We very quickly went into online learning modes of one kind or another. Basically, although there's kind of a report of slow reopening of sections of daily life, I mean, in our lockdown, we weren't even allowed to go outside to exercise until like the last week. So the situation is quite extreme in that regard, and I think the discussions around returning students to campus are very, very, I don't know, provisional at the moment is even a strong word. I mean, I think it's extremely uncertain whether we'll actually get back onto campus at all this year, this calendar year. I think the major issue here is the huge gap, kind of economic and social gaps within this in the communities in South Africa, which means that the government is extremely concerned about township communities where social distancing is really, I suppose, non-existent, and their great fear is that there's going to be a huge spike in community transmission. Of course, the situation is also based on hemisphere because we are going into winter. So when you're coming out into a summer period, we're going into what would be our general flu season, if you like, and the fear is that's going to exacerbate the situation.
Okay, Belgrade University of Arts also is online now, immediately from the mid-March, when the pandemics officially and lockout was proclaimed. And for my surprise, it functions perfectly on most of the departments. But of course, you can imagine that our acting department, who was the only department who was hiddenly working 20 years ago during the citizens' protests and the student protests, because they couldn't imagine being 3 months in boycott or not in work. Same now, they made a pressure, so they will restart, let's say, physical work or on the spot, on the premises of university from Monday onwards, because all of us who are, let's say, theory departments, we finished our, today, in fact, it was the last day of online courses for theoretical departments. So now the whole school will stay on the disposal for few practical departments, theater directing, the acting, and of course, film shooting, but they will not be doing that in the building, but the students of film directing camera will go outside trying to make their exam movies and so on. The pandemics have shown capacities to go online and to involve more, let's say, professors from outside, but also some guest practitioners from outside, from different countries, from former diaspora, but not only and not necessarily, and also had shown something which previously was not that clear. For example, when for different reasons, for example, when I was teaching, and I'm still teaching students in Gdańsk University in Poland, they were supposed to come in normal times to their classroom and listen to me through the screen. I would teaching through Skype or through any other of these formats, teleconferencing. Now it functions much better when each of the student is controlling his screen and is at home. And those classes, our students start really to enjoy and to be even much more interactive. So one of the positive outcomes of all of this was a higher level of interactivity during exactly theoretical classes, because students immediately start putting on chat questions, comments, and so on. Or even for some professors like me, I allow interruption, oral one anyway, in any moment. So the classes became really paradoxically more dynamic this way than in a conservative classroom where a certain level of hierarchy is immediately present by the structure of the classroom. However, it seems that a lot of students, and especially doctoral ones, are really enjoying the fact that libraries are going to be reopened from Monday so that they can go, because in spite of everything, not all the resources are available in a digital world.
Well, thank you. It's very helpful to hear what's going on in different parts of the world. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm in Royal Holloway. It's right in the outskirts of London. So earlier this week, here in the UK, they have started restricting, lifting some of the restrictions, so people are going back to work, and we're starting to see how the public transport is working and whether we can start reopening other sectors as well. It is also unclear whether when and how exactly we're going to start classes again in the autumn, but since mid-March as well, we moved classes online. And it was a very fast process. At Royal Holloway, if I remember well, it was on the week of 16th March that classes were moved online. And it was very, very fast. For personal reasons, like for concerns of safety, I moved my classes online before it was officially announced by the university. I was teaching some practice at that time. and students had started working on the practice-based assessment, so it was quite challenging. They were also concerned about themselves, and some of them self-isolated because they thought that they had symptoms and they were very sick. So everyone was a bit scared of going to the classroom and being so close to each other. What I have experienced in terms of teaching is a lot of anxiety on figuring out how to translate practice-based assessments for students in their final years or in the second year into an online format when they had been already collaborating and doing rehearsals for months. So it was a very fast turnaround. And there has been mostly kind of anxiety control in that sense, working with students very closely online and trying to keep meetings as well. That's what I can say for now. The university is closed, it's completely closed. Nothing is open, not even the shops or like food shops or anything like that on campus. Students who live on campus, they are still receiving catering and basic services. But other than that, everything is closed. And I was thinking as we were reading some of the articles for today, that we don't have a number or any official communication of how many people from campus have been affected, or if there has been like someone that has been severely ill. So we don't have that yet, and that's something that I wonder about.
You're muted. Amelia, we can't hear you.
I was going to say, could you keep your mics mute when you're not talking? Amina and Oliveira, do you have any updates just from your home universities in terms of like what's going on?
Sure. From our university specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are, well, we're kind of in an odd situation, and maybe this likewise relates to some of what we read for today. Our university we're a public university, we're a large public university, and we didn't really have the kind of infrastructure necessary to kind of massively switch to online learning. So when COVID broke out and the university senate decided that we would be going, that students would be sent back home and that we wouldn't be doing in-person teaching, they automatically said, we're giving you a 3-week pause in the semester while we configure, while we buy the subscriptions to the various kinds of technologies, while we set up the kind of, again, infrastructure that we need to pull this off. So we literally paused. And maybe we can think about this in the context of, time and dwelling and etc. But and then we restarted, and so our semester actually it should have ended today, and instead we have 2 more weeks to go. And as a public university, we're also connected to the kind of higher authority that oversees all, the centralized authority that oversees all higher education in Turkey, which is a very, very deeply politicized entity. So we're also beholden to some of the decisions that they make. And recent decisions on their part have further moved our calendar in a way that makes it now extend well into June. So in terms of just my and our students' experience of the semester, right now it feels very elastic, which is really in different ways proving to be challenging in terms of keeping students motivated, keeping our sense of why a syllabus looks the way it looks, how time is supposed to function in the classroom. Everything now seems a little bit up for grabs. So we're kind of trying to figure that out, thinking about what that means, and then thinking about ahead to the fall semester. And all of the kind of larger issues of inequality of access that we talked about last time are still very much there. There are entire students who have had to drop out of the learning experience because they simply don't have the kind of structure necessary at home to participate, and that too is an ongoing concern. So we're everywhere we look now, we have questions basically.
Since the last time we met, our registration for the fall semester started. It's still unclear what the medium of instruction will be, but it seems most likely that we will be online. A few days ago, California State System, which has nearly 500,000 students, announced that they are going mostly online in the fall. And that usually is sort of not directly relevant to us, but since this is the only system of a comparable size in the United States and with a comparable student body, there are sort of speculations about what the definitive decision is going to be on the part of the Chancellor of CUNY. The University of New York is under direct governance from the Board of Trustees, which are, or who are under the control of the governor of the state. So it is going to be whatever the governor decides. There have been interesting rumors mostly, or snippets of public statements from Andrew Cuomo, who is the governor of New York State and has become a media star in his own right on account of his press conferences, and especially, I think I've mentioned this, his PowerPoint presentations, which have these pithy one-liner statements about what's right, what's wrong, what one should do. So it sounds like Andrew Cuomo has been consulting with Bill Gates and sort of seeking advice from various powerful people. And it seems that the conversation with Bill Gates has had the effect of suggesting to him that something about the technological influx in our education is a good, welcome development. So the effect most immediately and perhaps most terrifyingly is on public schools, because it sounds like there's some push to move all of public education at the primary and secondary levels all online and not think about going back at all. There were even some statements about how being in the classroom is not a big deal. Why do we need to be in the classroom if we have all this technology? The corollary of that for the higher education is yet to be distinguished. The summer semesters are definitely all online. Everything's offered only online. And for the fall semester, we're waiting to see. I suspect that we will be all online. Again, related to that, there is a union-imposed deadline on all the colleges that are a part of the City University of New York to notify their contingent labor instructors by the 15th of May, which is today, about their appointments for the fall. In anticipation that it's unclear who can be appointed, the provost of my college decided to send non-reappointment letters to all contingent faculty, the people who were appointed semester by semester. So 437 people, I believe, is the number, who are officially not being reappointed in the fall. The sort of paradoxical truth in that is that this can't be a real solution for anything, because 70% of classes throughout the system are taught by contingent faculty. So some of these people will definitely be reappointed, but it's unclear which ones. And we're waiting to see how the enrollment works out. Again, through the grapevine, we get to hear that enrollment, for instance, in my college at Baruch, maybe one more, is relatively okay in the sense that it didn't drop precipitously compared to previous sort of regular semesters, but that it's definitely not what it used to be. There's obviously a great deal of confusion on the part of students about what higher education is for under these conditions. There's a great deal of disappointment among the seniors, the graduating seniors. I'm not sure what we have mentioned previously among the participants. The constituency at the City University of New York is by and large first generation students, first generation immigrants in New York City. So for a lot of our students, graduating is an enormous milestone, not just for them as individuals, but for the entire families who are new to the US. And this is the first experience with higher education and a great kind of success. So it's enormously sort of anticlimactic to graduate like this. There's some talk about what could happen maybe when there's more social interaction, that we could have some sort of makeup ceremony so that everybody who's supposed to graduate this spring gets a bit of a formal occasion to which they can invite their families. The latest from the mayor of New York is that at least for the month of June, there will be no social interactions. This, of course, is a part of a great political strife between the governor and the mayor. The governor being the kind of person who's supposed to be in charge of public health, but also of the business interest, and under the pressure from the President of the United States, who has expressed zero interest in helping states. So all states that have had high levels of infection, and New York, of course, the foremost among those, are on the verge of bankruptcy. So this is kind of where we stand right now.
Thank you, Olivera. Sylvia observed this morning when we had a chat about this session that most of us in this forum know each other from our joint experience on MA in International Performance Research that we had through Warwick and our consortium with Amsterdam and Helsinki and Belgrade. And also we kind of started thinking, what would international performance research look like, and pedagogies of that in this kind of context of pandemic. Today I received an email from the University of Amsterdam canceling all international exchanges for the rest of this academic year, and well, for the rest of this calendar year, so to speak. We don't know whether that will be canceled from January. And I was struck by Milena's observation about the excitement or advantages of this online teaching, and we had these highs and lows with MIPER as well. And when we did those induction weeks, Mark, and maybe Mark won't remember that, but Milena will, and Sylvia and I do, and that was exciting. And we did some telematic teaching with colleagues from Jawaharlal Nehru University. But we also do remember the kind of the advantages of all coming together in summer schools, like we did in Finland for 1 week with staff and students from partner universities, and being all together and learning not just in formal classes, but in all these other contexts. And I'm just wondering. And Maria mentioned also today that Royal Holloway might introduce something that's called flexible teaching, where part of students will have classes online, some would be in classes. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but about advantages, disadvantages of this, I mean, I don't know. People probably won't have much choice, but and dangers, as some of the articles that we read for today are warning about the dangers of this new normal and this new paradigm. So just wondering if anybody would like to pick up on anything or in regards to this, about the international dimension of this, but also just going digital and what that does also for even for job securities, as it's clear from the predicament of sessional instructors at CUNY. And that's also happening at work as well, Olivera. Milena is raising hand.
I think that, as our colleague from Istanbul said, this situation also raised the issue of equity, of social equity and right to access. I'm coming from a very special small university, University of Arts, where most of the students are coming already from let's say families who can afford and have everything at home, so they are capable to join, and classes are small, up to 15. My maximum class is 25, so they can always join. So it's not like law school that have in one generation few thousand students and so on. But that's one side of the problem, which became very obvious on the level of primary and secondary school teaching, not that much at university level, but primary school. We became aware that pupils in many homes, they don't even have television access to, because our government organized for primary schools pupils courses through television. So the large, how would say, in some schools, some directors being aware of that, of the situation in small villages that belong, small rural schools and so on, they fundraised and they somehow succeeded to cover up those families that are having more children and zero technologies and equipment and so on. But that is something that made very obvious to what extent our public system of education was not aware of a large scale of social differences. The same was with the school system and university. We became aware that our students that are from provinces, they had to face problems with bad internet. So finally, Ministry of Education had to make a very special agreement so that every student could, through the Ministry of Education, get access to a speedy and high quality internet for free. So that happened a month ago. So not, however, it passed 1 month of teaching where they didn't have, or they have a very problematic access to online teaching. Now, at least for university students, that that area has been solved. But another problem is that most of universities in last few years have incorporated practice-based learning and skill learning and project-based learning and research-based learning as part of curricula. And okay, research-based learning, all those parts in curricula, we successfully exchanged with internet-based research so that the students can have their individual research task that can be done through internet surveys, narrative analysis, iconology, and so on and so on. But for the project-based learning, for the internships and so on, that became heavily problematic. On my class, I, how would say, succeeded somehow to find, because as I said, it concerns small groups. So then for 15 students, you can negotiate with 15 cultural institutions to organize for them kind of online involvement in the present COVID practice of cultural institution, which is also not normal because they are now also offering theater performances, virtual exhibitions, and so on. But they realized that they could engage those students for viral marketing, for audience development in this, because this generation of 21 is much more skillful for that than employees in marketing sector of theater, museum, and so on. So somehow we even succeeded in these 2.5 months of COVID crisis to organize these virtual internships, but that's not really replacing real life and real, for example, a real participation in the production of the performances and so on. And for this generation, it's going to be a problem. And if we will go from the next year only online, next school year online, that's going to introduce the new problem. The fact now students and pupils, they know each other because they've been together 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But for the new generation who is just entering, for example, the school in October, so what? They're going to meet each other only virtually on social networks and so on. That's going to change, I think, a lot of class dynamic and so on, because it's not going to be the same. And of course, we are raising also sometimes, because all of us, we say that the schools are preventing to work and the cultural system is prevented of working. But you see, throughout the world, everyone is speaking when the sport is going to restart, football games and so on. No one is mentioning, although, for example, museums, I'm not speaking about Louvre with masses of tourists, but now as there is no travels, there is no museum who is going to be over flooded. So it's much more safe environment, but still it's not kept open, while the stadiums that are proven to be the fatal for Italy, for Spain, specifically for the spread of COVID virus, they are now under exploration how to reopen. So for our students in humanities and cultural sector, I think there is going to be a lot of challenges, that they will not have possibility for the field research, for example, student of cultural anthropology and so on, that for our students, especially of art practice, when the art practice is collective, when the art practice is individual, like painting, sculpture, and so on, it's still possible to be organized individually, because most of the classes anyway has been kind of individual. But for those team-based art practice, such as acting, theater directing, and so on, it's going to be the real challenge, or chamber orchestra playing, performing, and so on.
Yeah.
Yes, Mark, we can hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, the situation is obvious. The situation of inequities is very, very apparent, and we also in a situation, although my university is supposedly the #1 university in the country, its student body is very much like CUNY's student body, made up of first-generation students who have come into the system, and the university operates as a kind of social mobility vehicle to move people who essentially working class young people into the middle classes. So the university becomes this vehicle, but it also becomes the space in which certain access is provided that they cannot get outside of the university space. They get physical space in which to study, they get access to the internet, they get access to resources of one kind or another. Once they leave the campus, they don't have access to any of that stuff. And that's exactly what happened in this case. So there was an absolute evacuation of all students immediately within 3 days from the campus and back to their places where their parents live or wherever they could shelter, which sometimes is miles away, I mean, thousands of miles away from where the university is, and clearly there's no internet. So the first period of time was very much spent on trying to solve very intractable problems around connectivity. It's one thing to say that you're going to do online teaching, and very soon the word online was banned. So people started saying you're not allowed to talk about it as online learning anymore. You have to talk about it as emergency remote learning, which, so you have to keep emphasizing the fact that this isn't normal, this is an emergency, and it's happening at a distance. And some of it will be able to be done online, but we're even now in a third phase where we have to produce materials in a month that can be delivered through the postal service to people who are lying like miles away from any connectivity. So we in fact have we have the original course as envisaged, which cannot be taught. We have the emergency remote course, which is online for those who can connect. And then we have an emergency distance course. And each time it's like Plato's cave. It's like each time it's moved away from a sense of an ideal structure towards something which is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was just saying that there's this now. I think one of the overriding feelings that we're getting is that my colleagues are in a state of grief, essentially, for the loss of what I would think is teaching, as opposed to the distribution of learning content. So we're getting very good at distributing learning content in various formats, but the actual act of teaching has somehow been lost in the process. And in a school which is essentially a conservatoire, a school that's designed to train artists in an academic context rather than, it really does feel for many people that they've lost the very thing that drew them there in the first place, and the set of skills that they particularly use on a day-to-day basis have become redundant in this particular period. So while the theoretical courses and the research courses can continue to some extent online, and there is at least a sense of interactivity possible, all the others haven't. So, you know, going back to an acting class in South Africa is just not an option at the current moment. It's not legally possible. Nobody would come, even if we decided to resist that sense of lockdown. So, so that's one aspect of it. We're also, again, because of the hemisphere, right at the beginning of a year, not at the end. So we had to reimagine an entire year in 3 weeks rather than finish one. And so we were doing all of this on the fly. We were trying to set up internet. I mean, we distributed, I think, something in the region of 10,000 laptops in a space of 3 weeks to students to allow them to have devices to work on. Then we had to provide data. Then we had to draw up the actual materials for the online learning. And all of this while still doing all of these things and imagining the kinds of things that you might be imagining for your fall semester, while still being in class all the time. So it's been a real big challenge.
Thanks, Mark. Maria, did you wave?
Yeah, I did, yeah. There are many things that have become very clear around the assumptions about equity and equality to access to resources that, you know, talking and following the situation in different contexts. Like I'm from Colombia, so I've been following to my friends and colleagues also how they've been adapting to this. And there is the issue of, for example, people working in Bogota, and Bogota is, you know, the capital, it's a big city, and you have good connectivity and stuff like that. But there are students that they only have the data on their mobile phones, and data is very expensive in Colombia. So it's like you either listen to the class or just one day and then lose the data for the rest of the month. So suddenly being confronted to how do I adapt like a 1 hour lecture for students who don't have access to data and things like that, and very limited resources. And also maybe even here, assuming that students have access to laptops or to comfortable working spaces in their own homes. It is something that we might want to consider as well, and also issues of safety of working in different domestic spaces as well. Something that we probably, all of us have students who are not necessarily safe at home in many cases. So that's something to think about as well, for health reasons or for comfort reasons as well, among any other things that might happen at home. Also, the issue of the international students. There were many students, for example, that just got stuck here, that couldn't leave and could not leave, and have family members at the other side of the world who have been struggling, but also who might have been put in very precarious conditions because of the coronavirus as well. Maybe some of them dying, or issues like that. So the international challenges of education are not only about, being able to have access to things, but also what are the emotional implications of being far away from home when you have all these academic requirements falling on top of you, not being able to cope as well. How I've been questioning myself how flexible and maybe generous can the education system be for different kind of learning capacities and learning abilities as well, and maybe to consider more the emotional side of the learning experience in many ways, and how this whole situation has forced everyone to slow down, and students coming in a very, I can see the students, many students towards the end of term being so exhausted. They cannot, it's like they're burdened by their own souls because they have so many assessments. And suddenly, all the effort of the assessments and everything is just taken away because they can't really work on anything like that. So that having to slow down so abruptly and not being able to consider the slowing down as maybe the potential for creativity becomes there. For me, my teaching, I went back to performance artists from the 70s, on video artists from the 80s or something like that were slowing down, focusing on nothingness, to give them a source of inspiration that maybe a different way of approaching to the world was even possible. But luckily for us, I guess, for us working here in the UK context at least, we have a few months to try and think how we might have to adapt, because we will have to adapt to how to open up or to even rethink teaching, at least for a period of time. But it does make me think about other parts of the world when that time is not available and resources are very precarious, even more so. Yeah. Oh, I had something else, sorry. There has been a very long discussion from the student union at the university on having lectures recorded so that students can have access to them. So in some cases, the lecture theaters, your lecture is actually recorded either via audio or video. So now this obviously raises the question of whether everything is going to be recorded and made available, how and why, and if someone records. I've been in classrooms with students recording with their own devices or even with the cameras, and this might be even more extreme here. So it's something also that needs to be part of the conversation as we have all noticed.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Emine.
I'm thinking as I'm listening to everybody, it seems like there are certain patterns that are shared in all of our experiences, and then there's a lot that is just so locally specific. And I'm just wondering what that means in terms of being able to kind of put our first steps forward in terms of thinking about what we kind of strive for or kind of struggle for in the years to come. I'm realizing like one of the articles that we were reading said something like distance learning or online learning is like it's what management desires, it's managerial desires, something along those lines. And the experience, what I've been witnessing around me is that it's a slightly more mixed than that. So there are like the grief that you were talking about earlier, that's most definitely there. The loss of co-presence is there. Likewise, I find that the Zoom classroom in no way replicates the kind of experience that the in-person campus experience provides to students, particularly students who are at my university as well, very much the first in their families to attend college. Very much, this is very much working as a kind of social instrument of social mobility. So the various components of that are lost on Zoom. And then of course, those who lack connectivity drop off the grid altogether. So we've seen that time and again. And then there's a whole other range of experiences too, where, you know, Istanbul is a city of 17 million, and many of our students have to commit to commute for 2 to 3 hours one way sometimes to be able to come to school. So, you know, mandatory attendance is always a kind of key issue here for us. Do we make attendance mandatory? We want to, but then that means that by the end of this semester, many students are just, the physical fatigue of trying to get themselves onto campus space itself is just a constant struggle. So I've also been hearing from some students and also from faculty that they feel as though they are also those who have the luxury of being able to connect from home and who no longer have to, you know, trek through endless urban space for hours and hours on end. They're finding a sense of relief in being able to participate from home. Some of my colleagues are talking about feeling like they're resting for the first time in a decade. So there's that dimension as well, right? So it seems like there are a whole range of desires that could be associated with online learning, not necessarily just managerial. That's not to say that we, you know, that we don't fight it and we don't question what we lose in the process. Ultimately, I still think we lose a lot, including that general kind of common sense of the social that the articles that we read talked about. But it seems to me that we're going to have to think about like the multiple desires and possibilities that online learning, distance learning brings with itself to be able to think about where we move forward from here, I guess. I don't know if that makes it, that's a jumble of thoughts, but yeah, what are the whole range of experiences that distance learning makes possible? What does it foreclose? Who gets to participate? It seems like all of these we'll have to keep thinking about. Yeah.
This makes sense to me on the most obvious level first, because in the city of 9 million, the days are different when the commute is not a part of it. And it seems like there is a great deal of relief everywhere. Although it was the building and the space that was also a respite from the usual spaces that students occupy, that for many of them it was the only nice space they had. And we have a relatively new building, so it was actually quite an astonishing achievement in the context of public education in New York to have a nice open space in which to gather. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what about this is valuable and reveals the possibilities that we didn't pay attention to or didn't consider to be a good thing, including the detail that Mark mentioned about sort of overnight finding resources to provide computers to students who never had them. We did the same thing. I think the option is still available for students who need to get some device on which they can do work, that they can get it from school, that we could have done this and made lives of many students so much easier and so much more work possible. But I'm not sure that we're in a position to say what of it is going to be good and what of it is going to be bad, that it's unclear to me what the climate and the scene is going to be like. I don't even want to say when we return. I don't think there's any returning. That's how it feels to me here, that there's no going back to what it used to be.
Sylvia, you were raising a hand.
Okay, yeah, I think I unmuted myself. Well, there's just so much to pick up from what people have said. I just wanted to maybe I stick to a couple of things, and also kind of building on Olja's in a way. I think one is to think about all these technologies and distant learning as what Mark said, a temporary measure, and what it is or has been as a teaching enhancing tool. So I think as a temporary measure, it has worked in different ways, to different extents. Again, emphasizing the socioeconomical aspects that people have mentioned, but and again, in the past, where we combined it with other things, you know, it was an enhancing thing. It was a nice teaching tool, but it was kind of balanced with other ways of teaching, and with groups being present in situ in different places and engaging together and so on. So I think what I'm worried about is not to lose the sight of the fact that this should be a temporary measure. So I find quite alarming what you, Olja, said about consideration that primary school or public schools in the US might move to this kind of model entirely. That's quite dystopian in my view, because also going back to the articles we've read, the importance of not only sharing time, but sharing space, and the importance of creating, because we are creating in this classroom some kind of public spaces, some kind of little public spheres that then, you know, do other things in the society. So it's not even, yes, one part of it is the managerial control, reducing maybe the amount of people you need, kind of all this melting of working hours with every other hours, melting of the private space and working space, which is again something we have to watch for, but it's also that sort of again this aspect of social control that has been mentioned many times. Even though I found I did one or two sessions for Milena's UNESCO program, and it was a big class of 30 or something, and they were all present because there were no excuses. Otherwise, when I was there in person, you know, they would, you know, sometimes they'll come, sometimes they don't, and it was surprising how much discussion we could have. I was worried that it's going to be a very ex cathedra, but it wasn't. So as a novelty and as a temporary measure, I thought, oh, this is interesting, but I would be very sort of I don't know, disheartened if this becomes, or I think it should be actually resisted, because I don't think we will have a pandemic forever. There might be new pandemics, new viruses, new dangers, but I don't think it's, you know, these are cyclical things, and we have to kind of, I suppose, resist a state of exception to be very Agambanian, you know, that becomes a new normal. On the one hand, and on the other hand, I want to go back to this question of slowness that Maria has raised, that Mark has written in his article about in a different context, but I think and I think Emine has mentioned it before. You know, what can we take from this in a sense of how do we rethink how we do things? Not because we cannot be together in the same place, but how do we rethink how we do things, how we measure our, you know, pedagogical sort of outputs, how we measure our research outputs. Even, you know, I'm homeschooling my teenage daughter now, and we are sticking more or less to the curriculum because she will have exams next year. But now that you don't have a pressure that, you know, today is the test and you have 1 hour to do it, or, you know, this is the classroom material, so you have to finish it in 45 minutes or else, you know, now that you can sort of spend more time if you need on something, or less time if you're done earlier, or go some, you know, it just, I have a temptation to kind of somehow unschool her or de-institutionalize her, and I don't have the courage entirely to do that, because I think maybe the institution will reclaim her in in a few months' time. But I'm thinking just like, you know, we can do this in such a in much more relaxed way. We can do this in much more inspiring way. Not because I know better than they, but because, you know, I think we can kind of pause and not just always think about the outcome. School is not an exam preparation. School should be something else, but it has turned into an exam preparation. So it just rethinking, you know, can we metaphorically or maybe even literally, can we think of slow pedagogy, slow university, slow something out of this? I don't know.
If I may enter, have I unmuted? Yes. I think we absolutely have to do, that's our unique chance to oppose this pressure, capitalist pressure on universities to have tough deadlines, success, measurement, everything quantifiable, zero time for idleness, time for self-reflection, time for deschooling. And again, I thought that we are at university level somehow privileged, because we can use this time for, so I can change my curriculum. Nobody is going to, because I'm going to make exams. So there's not going to be universal state baccalaureate. So the poor professors in high school or even in primary school cannot change anything. And they are under huge pressure so that their pupils will not be losers when these final tests one day will come. So unfortunately, this time was not possible to be used by primary and secondary schools, teachers and professors for any kind of improvisation, but we could do it. And I think, speaking with some of my colleagues, that many of us, in fact, changed our curricula, that even we went to ask students in a very banal way, have you read yesterday newspapers? Have you find anything relevant for our profession? Let's discuss it from this point of view and so on. So this right for moments for self-reflection, which doesn't have, which is not obsessed with impact agenda, because we always have to say, what's going to be impact of your study course? What are outcomes of this program? Probably we can now insist that we cannot know in advance what is going to be outcome. We cannot plan. As this corona, we hadn't planned, but however, we see that there are outcomes. There are, but they are not those that probably we have foreseen and so on. So in this sense, I would be lobbying for a certain right for deschooling, for improvisation, for situational learning, to free our curriculum, even for future, to use this opportunity one day to evaluate what was the knowledge, skills, abilities, capacities that had been received by pure chance, by situational learning, that were not planned in advance, and why, for example, at least it's pressure on us, I assume it's everywhere in Europe, we have to make our curricula in such details, every class, outcome of every class, exactly learning, reading material for every class and so on. So that even, you cannot even give right to students like, go around and look for yourself what's going to be your reading material for this class, because we are framing these minds and leave very little moments for the free explorations. That's what I think probably one day when we would evaluate this semester, we can see to what extent something sudden, on the first sight, maybe even inappropriate, what kind of debates has been raised and what positive that brought in the process of learning.
Is there anybody else who wants to come
in? So when I wrote that article for the politics book on slow politics of theatre, I was very much reacting at the time to the sense of the production and the kind of economization of university outputs and all of that kind of stuff, and the emphasis on quantity over quality, and so in an environment in which the drive to production is the main thing, then slowness becomes a resistance, which in quite an obvious way. When suddenly that everything stops and you're now in a state where you're told, well, or it becomes apparent that you can't drive to production very easily because of the current circumstances, then slowness becomes the primary condition and not the resistance, if you know what I mean. And then it becomes almost like we want to resist now the need to be slow or the need to stop by coming up with all these very interesting new solutions and strategies. And the thing for me is to adopt slowness, but also to adopt slowness slowly. So the feeling that I have is that what happened certainly in our context was that everyone grabbed onto this thing with a huge amount of enthusiasm. Now we have the time to rethink. Now we have the time to imagine new possibilities. And we're all going to do this with our absolute commitment to creativity. And so there was this enormous kind of rush to produce stuff again. And after about 3 weeks of this, what I'm now discovering is a burnout that is happening within the slowness itself. So in this, what is supposed to be a step, you know, right in the beginning, I sat down and I said to my partner, you know, this is like what I was thinking about coming true in a way, like coming into manifesting itself in the real world. I'm just going to stop and I'm going to be able to do all those things that I couldn't do before because I was running around the university attending meetings. And that's not what's happened at all. I just became a kind of super machine running from one Zoom meeting to another Zoom meeting, from one planning session to another planning session, and putting stuff online and working in all hours of the night. And it just feels to me now that we've reached the point of like we hit the wall and it's a burnout, and it's a different kind of burnout now. So I fully embrace the intellectual idea of slowness, but we have to find ways to do that without burning out in the process. I don't know, it sounds paradoxical, but it feels to me like that's what I'm experiencing at the moment.
Amina, please.
Yeah, one of the things I took from your article is that maybe slowness, it does have to do with temporality, duration, but at the same time, it seemed like the essence of what slowness there gave us was the not being forced by the imperative of a product, right? So it seems like that's something that still translates to our current situation, whether or not time is still the larger kind of context through which we're envisioning what resistance looks like, right? So maybe slowness, the meaning of slowness has changed and shifted. Maybe it's no longer a question of speed, but just how we're imagining what an end product is supposed to be and what it's supposed to look like. Maybe that's something, an element of that earlier argument that we can hold on to. Because again, I'm thinking, I'm going to sound like I'm kind of defending online learning. I'm not at all. But again, one thing I'm hearing from students is that, so we're doing a lot of synchronous Zoom meetings for our courses right now. And those students who cannot join because now that they're at home, they have other responsibilities that are coming in the way, care of siblings, care of elders, etc. We're doing our synchronous Zoom sessions with those who can attend, and we're recording them, just like we're recording this session, so that students who can't be there can listen later. Even those who are there can listen later. So they can pause, rewind, listen again if necessary. So engage in a kind of slow learning that they can't do under ordinary circumstances. And for our students, that's particularly important because we teach in English to students whose native language is not English. So keeping up in the classroom is a huge source of anxiety under normal circumstances. So there is something about this new platform that has provided them with an opening, even though I completely agree that in the long term, what it takes from us is a lot more than what it gives us. So it seems like what counts as slow, all of these meanings are shifting now under our current circumstances. So maybe the emphasis can continue to be on, and what was, impact, as you were saying earlier, Milena, as well, impact, product-driven kind of thinking, the imperative to kind of produce at the end of a process. Maybe that seems to be a place where we can continue to focus our energy.
Yeah, and just note from this article from Asha Gessen from New Yorker, where she says, unlike most of us in this moment, scientists, they have purpose and community. But, what about lonely educators? And she says lonely writers, lonely economists, lonely architects, filmmakers, all those lonely people whose job is to imagine the future. And I'm just thinking about specifically, the challenges for our profession. That's been brought up earlier, but, the purpose. Nobody knows how long this is going to last. And, where the students will be coming. We canceled 2 new MAs that we were about to launch in September, and that was just canceled because of the COVID crisis, or postponed for the next year. But whether they will ever come into place, that's to be seen. So, and I don't have a specific question, but it was interesting to hear that Mark is at the beginning of the academic season, and I always admired his all kinds of pedagogical practices, but in particular his way of working with students on modeling performances. He used that term when you don't carry something out in full, but just kind of modeling, preparing. And was wondering if, Mark, you have any kind of further thoughts on this, or anything to share at this stage, even though it's early, but in your thinking, in particular in relation to creative practices, research, how we can go on with this kind of pedagogy for the year to come if things move online.
Well, I actually think that in the artistic research space, it's actually easier to some extent than in the kind of craft-based training space, because if a student is coming to the university to learn to act, for example, if that's what their primary concern is, it's very difficult to do that. I mean, you can do a certain amount of work in a synchronous Zoom session, but it's not the same as being in a group acting class. But in relation to the postgraduates and the research-based stuff, most of them are working individually and conceptually, and there's a lot that they can do on their own in their own home spaces, and they use the technology and they take to the technology very well. So you just have to throw some software at them, and 20-something people will produce something within a 3-week period that I would take 3 weeks to learn how the software worked. They immediately know, and they immediately respond to it in a particular kind of way. So in terms of delivery, that work is continuing. The difference is now that everything here is asynchronous. So we've been told not to teach in a synchronous way because of the inequality. So if we teach even if we can record the session, the assumption that someone will get that recording somewhere down the line and have access to it is essentially still embedding the structural inequalities that are already in the system even more, by privileging those who have immediate access and can actually interact with you online. So the response from large members of the community was to push for a complete, not a ban, but certainly a resistance against too many classes that required everybody to be in the same place at the same time. So in essence, all of these micro practices that used to be done in a group, in a space that in which in 3 hours you could deal with 10 students, for example, you're now dealing with each of those students individually at the time that the student is able to do it, when the student has reached that stage of the program that you set. And so from a kind of supervisor point of view, or from a teacher point of view, it's exhausting, because you're now repeating the same process over and over and over again at a complete, it's not even consistent. One person has jumped to stage 3 when another person is still on stage 1. You are jumping backwards and forwards and trying to keep your head right in that process. So I think that there are definite possibilities, but I don't know how sustainable it is for the teacher in that context. I think the students, given access to technology and time, will produce something. Again, it's come to production. And I agree entirely that we have to think about whether these need to be output-driven things. You know, I was always skeptical of the fact that autistic research needed to result in a product. I kind of feel that the way of getting there, or what arises in the process of participation, is much more illuminating than the final thing itself. So I think that there are a lot of possibilities, but I think there are issues around teaching that need to be taken on board here, and how we actually sustain ourselves in the process of an asynchronous thing, where everybody can just say, today I want to do this, tomorrow I'm going to do this, will you come with me on that journey today? And you have to say, well, you know, I'm not in that space today, I'd rather be in that space, but you know, it's really difficult. Yeah.
I'm just, Milena, yes.
I just wanted to add, because I get reminded on something that I suggested but was heavily rejected by everybody. It's the fact that our system, not only educational but also for helping professional artists, is a system of sponsoring projects, not artistic research as such, because they want to sponsor eventually research if it ends up for sure 100% with project in the deadline which is promised in advance and so on. And that's something that I think it's killing our not only educational system, because it has to have some deadlines due to the fact that we have to have grades and that we have to give exams and evaluate throughout the year. But generally, cultural life is so, I would say, so speeded. I'm not sure it can be said in English like this, speeded up by, so we are forced to do project by project in a very quickly and efficient way. And thus I'm going to remind you who might find this text probably somewhere, Tom Stoppard, the text for New Yorker, once upon a time when he visited Lev Dodin in Mali Theater in St. Petersburg, where they were rehearsing his trilogy. And he was asking Lev Dodin, so when it's going to be the premiere? And Lev Dodin looked at him like, how the hell I can know when it's going to be? When the performance will be ready. But he closed his theater. There was no performances. It was only research, rehearsals, and doing. And his status enabled him to work it in a way to take as much time for artistic research as needed. And that's in today's world so rare and so inexistent. And that's something that we have to fight for artistic research that not necessarily should end up with a project that is going to be publicly presented, evaluated, and so on.
I can add something if, yeah. Just I was thinking, I started to think back on MIPER that some of us have experienced again, which wasn't really it wasn't exactly a project that didn't have an outcome. It had a lot of outcomes, and outcomes were very important. But it had resources like Dodin. It had enough scaffolding for us to be international, to be to have the mobility, to not only passively study international performance, but to kind of embody it, be in it, try it, work with faculty from all over the world, and so on. So part of it is really a sort of a question of a chronotop, because now we are a very Bakhtinian situation. We are like in one of these strange fictional worlds where we can be, we have the same time but different space. So it's that sort of anomaly, really. So we need to eventually heal and come back to the same space somehow. But I was thinking about slowness, and I was thinking about the MIPER summer school as an experiment in slowness, because those summer schools, which some of you have experienced, and we kind of want to revive it as some kind of lost Arcadia, is because, we would be isolated somewhere in a Finnish woodland or somewhere in Serbia, and then there was nothing else but to engage with whatever the project is, and for us as teachers to engage with the pedagogy. And we had a student, and I want to mention him here because I think he fits into this topic, is Diego de la Vega Wood. And his project was a project about the politics of slowness. And the whole dissertation was about the politics of slowness. I was his supervisor. I don't remember it in greatest detail, but he was advocating this slowness as a political thing, as a little bit also it's touching on what you were saying, Mark, as well, although going very much into philosophy and time and things like that. And very, so some of it was a bit above my head, to be honest. But for a long time, we were grappling like, okay, Diego, what the hell are you doing? And I remember sitting at Warwick with Milia, playing good cup, bad cup, trying to figure out what is he after, because it was very, very abstract. And then it clicked for me as his supervisor in that woodland in Finland, where we had a dissertation session with him. We could take our time. Somehow we didn't have to, I didn't have to be elsewhere. Nobody else had to go and cook dinner. Nobody else had to go and, I don't know, take care of a child or work or somewhere else. So we just kind of, we just sat outside, we talked at a very slow pace, not arriving at great ideas and solutions very quickly. And suddenly this project clicked for me. But for that, we had financial resources to all be together somewhere. We didn't have the pandemic, so we could be in the same space. We could, slowness is not, slowness is expensive, I think, but I think we might need to kind of fight for it. Anyway, I think Maria wants to say something, so
But it's
Can I just say something, Maria? But then we also had days that went on until the sun never set. So it was like time, going back to the periods of time. It was long, stretched out time.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great event.
I mean, I was one of the students in MIPER, and I was in Warwick, and I was in Finland. I was in Finland between January and June, so that was very extreme for someone coming from the Caribbean, I must say. That was something. But there was something that we used to talk about amongst like different MIPER students, that it was like this sense of first not belonging, but also a short displacement, that we kind of only had ourselves to rely on in a way. And it was kind of a process of pulling oneself together in the midst of a lot of uncertainty, because you were kind of thrown into a very different place, and then you would spend there just a few months. So you didn't have the time to settle at the same time. So I think that coming to terms with that experience of being just kind of hanging from the air for a few months, and accepting that was very important in the experience of my paper, beyond the actual academic content of it, because each year had like different scholars coming from different parts of the world. For example, the first cohort had Mark. I never studied with Mark, I studied with other people. So we all had very different experience, but I think that the shared experience was this sense of uncertainty and having to kind of look into oneself in the process to be able to cope somehow. But that wasn't abrupt, like this experience. Like I feel when the lockdown was announced here in the UK, I had been preparing to go for fieldwork in Colombia for 8 weeks, and we had been kind of preparing for months to be able to do this work on the field, and then suddenly, you know, we couldn't do that. It was very abrupt, and we had to kind of slow down again and rethink on how we could continue this collaboration. Funding was extended for that. But I want to draw the attention to, like, there's something about the abruptness of how abrupt it has been to be forced to slow down. It's not something that we could decide, oh, I'm going to try this method that is slow, whatever. And still thinking or being in the outcome kind of mentality. We have to produce, we have to do this and that. And what I struggle with is how to balance both things, being forced to slow down, to being unable to produce something, to deliver something, but at the same time, having in the back of my head that that's the only thing that I can do and the thing that I have to do. And for me, I think that this, as a lecturer, has been something that I have tried to communicate to my students in many ways, because I did have that experience as an undergraduate. There were like exercises that we were forced to just slow down and think and create in a different way. And that was part of the curriculum as well. So like thinking, creating a space for improvisation, and thinking about this abrupt slowing down as an opportunity to put that into a curriculum as well and create the space for it. Like Silvia has said it, we need to create the space for that. And maybe some people haven't thought about how important it is to be able to do that over and over again. Just a thought.
It seems like, oh, sorry.
Sure, go on, Amina, please.
I was just going to say, but it seems like being able to feel like an agent in the process of determining the conditions of one's slowness, right? The conditions under which one is going to experience slowness. Feeling agency in that process seems to be key to making slowness do the political work we want it to do, right? Enforced slowness of various kinds is something else, right? It seems like being able to feel agency in the process of configuring the boundaries, the context of that slowness, that seems to be key to making that temporality work. Anyway, that was just something I was thinking, Maria, as you were talking about the abruptness, and yeah. Anyway, that's all.
Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to shift back to the internationalization thing you brought up, Milia, because what I experienced was in the rush to produce materials. I think what this does is it reinforces or inscribes the hegemonies of knowledge distribution and information distribution in very specific ways. So one of the first things that happened was we said, okay, let's look for online performances that we can expose our students to, that they can then use as examples or as case studies. And quickly the international publishing sector moved into gear and started to send us free trials of this, that, and the other for online performance education. You know what these things are. And but what is absolutely clear there is that those things are repositories of a particular kind of work coming from a particular kind of space. So after years of trying to change the curriculum to reflect, in our case, an African context, or let's call it a global South context at least, suddenly you're faced with the available material being very European again, or very American. And now do you say, yes, well, they're offering it to us for free, or for free for a period, and we're now going to use this material because it's the only thing we have. And in our context, any conversations that so I'm just at the beginning of a 5-year research project that involves a lot of contact, and we've finally got resources to travel, for example, throughout the continent, and to begin processes of interaction that have not been possible for a very long time, because travel across Africa is a very expensive and a very difficult thing, actually. And now suddenly we're forced back, because that can't happen. So you've got the resource, but you can't travel. In most other African countries, connectivity is even worse than the situation is in South Africa. So suddenly you don't have access to anything other than what is being produced by the publishing industry located in the global north. So suddenly we cut off from a range of sources that are possible. We can't send our students to the theater. We can't engage with even our own practice in some ways. And so we're again forced back into a particular paradigm, which we've been trying to resist in particular ways, particularly in the last 2 years, because of the fees must fall, roads must fall movements, and the student shutdowns of the university and everything in the last 2 years. That has really motivated or inspired a new vision of the curriculum. But that new vision of the curriculum is being challenged by this thing. So it's almost like it's part of that, the same as that article about biopolitics in a way, because it's in a sense that's causing us to come back into the fold, so to speak.
Yeah, that's so true, Mark. And I don't have any answers to that, except, I think you highlighted how important it is to actually keep these informal networks in place so that we can share resources, and resist that kind of hegemonic impulse again. I mean, today we got an email from the head of school saying, Brecht's Mother Courage will be available for 7 days directly from the archives of the Berliner Ensemble. But that just kind of, and what a great opportunity this is for theater historians, and maybe it is, but you actually brought up exactly this other issue that's so important for what we do. I'm conscious of the time. I mean, this has been great. We won't be cut off probably because Olya got us on her special Zoom thing. But are there any final thoughts? Last time Sylvia asked about kind of the silver lining of this whole crisis. I won't ask that again, but anything, in relation to any of these things that we discussed. And I think we will try to organize another meeting, probably again in a couple of weeks, and topic to be kind of decided. Olya is in the first plan. Did you? At least on my screen.
No, I had said while I was muted that I have my First World subscription. This is one of the magical things that happened overnight because it was suddenly possible. Although there's no money for anything usually, but there was money for a subscription to a corporate tool. Anyway, I was going to say the interesting thing to me is not necessarily, I don't think it's silver or lining. I think something's kind of being structurally reorganized, and that it's important to keep paying attention, because I think there is an opportunity, if I can use that language, to get something good and new that we couldn't have gotten under the old conditions. There are going to be a lot of losses because of the new conditions, because so much of what we were trying to do and what we thought was good about it is physically impossible now. So I'm not sure that it's a good time to make any plans or pronouncements, but more like keep your eyes peeled to whatever it is that's happening in the particular conditions. Before I got on the Zoom meeting, I was listening to the radio because I'm old-fashioned like that. And at between 9 and 10 on New York Public Radio, they have BBC International. And there was a report from a person in the World Health Organization who was reporting about what the corona situation is in Africa, sort of considered as an entire continent. And it was sort of a very numerical kind of report that didn't account for the variety of circumstances inside the continent. But one of the sort of fascinating questions and answers was how the host from the BBC was asking, how do you explain the low rates of infection and death in Africa, the continent? And the person responded, well, we know by now that the infection sort of gets to certain kinds of populations, especially vulnerable are people over 65. The percentage of population over 65 on the continent of Africa is 4%. 4% of the population is over 65, compared to Italy, for instance, where it's almost 20. So all kinds of things to talk about when it comes to vulnerability and what kinds of pre-existing conditions get dragged into this, who got to record their performances and archive them and be European. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch, and we are, as Milena was saying, in a super rarefied air in which we can actually afford to stay at home and watch things as they happen physically to other people. So I don't know, I'm into the observation part right now.
Anybody else? I think we got slowly exhausted. But it's been great to see you all and to reconnect with some of you today as well after such a long time. Many thanks to Mark and Emine and Maria and Silvia, Olivera, Milena. Have I forgotten everybody? Anybody, I mean, no. And yeah, if there are anybody, Silvia, did you want to say anything anymore?
I just want to say thank you to you, because you cannot thank yourself.
Thanks to the two of you for organizing.
Absolutely.
And to Olivera for giving us her link.
Yeah, we can do it again next time, because might as well use it since we got it. All right, great to meet everyone and great to see those of you that I have met in real life.
And let's do it again, and we'll try to post this again on the Cultures of the Left website and send you the link so that you have this maybe also as a resource.
Yeah. All right. See you later.
Okay,
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.